Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 3. Now let's start the fanfic. Currently Team 7 had been walking down the path after having been dropped off by the boat. Their current formation was having Hikari in the front while Sayuri and Hinata were to the side of their client Tazuna while Fugaku was in the very back. Each one of them were alert and were expanding their sensor abilities to their maximum range. All ninja have at least a small range where they can sense chakra. Those that are called sensors, however, have ridiculously large ranges, and some of the most gifted sensors are even able to tell what a person is feeling. Fugaku had an average range of about 15 meters radius. His Sharingan does not increase his sensor abilities since that is not one of its abilities. Hinata has a range of around 25 meters radius thanks to her Byakugan. Sayuri, surprisingly enough, was a sensor just like her mother was and had a very impressive range of almost half a mile radius. Hikari had a range of only 50 meters, larger than average thanks to the chakra sealed inside of her but not as great as that of a sensor's. Too bad she didn't inherit that from her mother, unlike a certain someone. Though even if they had a range of only 10 meters in radius, they were able to feel the slight amount of chakra being used above them in the trees. Out of pure instinct and reflex, all four of them launched a kunai only to have them hit a kawarimi block of wood. Immediately forming a protective circle around their client, they immediately took out their signature weapons, or in Fugaku's case a kunai. What laid before them was surprising to say the least. In front of them was Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist. And he was currently being kicked in random locations by his daughter, who was calling him an idiot and a moron. You idiot. I told you we should have simply avoided the group so that we could have been done with this mission, but no. You simply couldn't help yourself when facing the possibility of a god. Damn. Fight. Yelled out Haku as she continued to kick him while her was down. After falling on their faces, the four Konoha nin and the one client got up and had huge sweat drops on their heads. I may not be a ninja, but I've had the chance to look through the bingo book once or twice in the past couple of years, and I know that Zabuza Momochi isn't the level of ninja that can simply be kicked around by a teenage girl. Deadpan Tazuna as he rubbed his eyes and pinched himself to make sure what he saw in front of him wasn't some kind of hallucination brought on by his overconsumption of alcohol combined with his old age. So have I, and honestly I expected something, I don't know, more from him. Stated Hikari as she was recovering from her earlier face plant. This thought was shared among her teammates, which was apparent by their nods. Now at this point Zabuza and Haku were both paying full attention to the ones that attacked them. And of course Zabuza got up without any injuries on his body. Thank you, anime logic. Anyway, what are you two doing here? If you are here to interfere with our mission, then we will have to deal with you now. Stated Fugaku as he activated his Sharingan. His mind was currently factoring in the dangers that these two presented themselves as. Zabuza himself was a known variable since most of his attacks were listed in the bingo book. However, Haku was an unknown variable. This girl was not listed anywhere in the bingo book and was not a known associate of Zabuza. At least not to those outside of Uzu, but they don't know that. Don't worry. As long as your mission is not to protect Gato, then you have nothing to worry about. As long as your team doesn't get in our way, then there won't be any problems. Stated Haku as she began to form Hyouten Senbons around the Konoha nin along with small orbs of fluid ice that she could control to make chains, whips, small shields, and can only be controlled by Haku. Even if there was another Hyouten user, except for Naruto and Yuki, they wouldn't be able to control these orbs. The tension in the air was so thick that one could cut it with a kunai. Which is what Zabuza tried to do and found that it actually put up some resistance. What the hell are you doing, Zabuza-san? Asked Haku with a perplexed look on her face. She honestly couldn't understand some of the things her father did sometimes. She was glad that Meika-san often helped with Zabuza's idiocies, even if she did so through distracting him with. Don't worry about it. Besides, I'm not too sure myself. Stated Zabuza as he started rubbing his chin. With that said, the two of them started to walk away until Fugaku asked them a question. A question that would only make this mission take longer than they would have wanted. What is that symbol on your Hittite? Asked Fugaku, inspecting the symbol more closely. He felt as though he had seen that symbol before. His genin felt the exact same way. Oh, this is the symbol of Uzugakure. The village hidden in the whirlpools. Stated Zabuza, seeing no harm in telling that small tidbit of information. That is until he got sent flying backwards thanks to a certain Uzumaki. Of course, this wasn't the only reaction that was received. Sayuri had a small smile on her face that disappeared almost as it appeared. Fugaku was the same, except his eyes widened a little bit. Strangely enough, Hinata widened her eyes before subconsciously rubbing the back of her right hand with her left. That's impossible. Uzugakure fell years ago. It fell when my mother was still a girl, so how are you living there? Screamed out Hikari as she readied the chains on her arms for battle. Her mother had told her about what happened to her home village and was planning on taking her daughter to the ruins later on once she became a chunin. But now she was hearing that Uzugakure was being run by a cage again, and she feared that it was simply someone trying to steal their family's secrets. Of course, after half a second after Hikari had finished her rant, she was suddenly forced to jump back due to Haku causing 3 of her fluid ice orbs to change into fluent moving spears that pierced the ground where Hikari was just standing. Is there a reason why you are attacking us now? If you do not cease your attacks now, we will be forced to respond with lethal force. Stated Haku as all half the water in the area began to float around her. The wind also began to pick up around her as well, signifying her high affinities for each of those 2 elements. Thanks to Naruto's and Zabuza's training, she was now well versed in her Suiten, Futen, and Hyouten techniques. Hikari, stand down. These nin obviously have no ill will towards, and it would not be a good idea for us to cause a war between our 2 villages without just cause. Now stand down, or else I'll have you doing D ranks for a year. Stated Fugaku as he ordered his genin to stop fighting and to continue their mission. Fine. But this isn't over, yelled Hikari as she reapplied her chains and headed back towards her group. That is until a huge dragon made of water crashed into her, sending her crashing into a tree. That was when everyone noticed Zabuza coming out from where he was sent by Hikari with his huge blade straight out in front of him, pointing at Hikari. Don't you know it's rude to attack a person without any warning? Yelled out Zabuza as several veins could be seen bulging around his forehead, signifying his anger. Of course, the share though of everyone besides him and Hikari was, isn't that exactly what you just? Alright, if it's a fight you want, then it's a fight you're going to get. Yelled out Hikari as she once again released her chains and started charging towards Zabuza. Seeing that she would need assistance, Fugaku went ahead to help her while sending Sayuri to fight the unknown nin. He left Hinata to protect the client in case anyone tried to kill him while they were fighting. So with that, they went towards their respective opponents. With Haku and Sayuri, they decided to separate themselves from their respective teachers. Once they felt that they were far enough away, they stopped and simply sat down beside one of the trees. So who has that godly idiot been doing so far? Have you been keeping him in line for me along with Yuki-chan? Asked Sayuri as she leaned back onto the tree. She had known about Haku and Yuki being Naruto's mates for a while now. After all, she and Naruto stayed in touch thanks to the necklace he gave her. The necklace has a seal placed on it so that Naruto could teleport to her no matter where she was or where he was. So from time to time he would come and visit her. He would tell her about what had been happening so far in Uzu and with his other mates. She was also one of his mates and she had no problem with sharing him as long as she got her fair share of time with him. She saw his other mates as sort of her sister figures. So she and Haku and Yuki were close and almost never fought with each other. Well, it's been tough since he's merged with Okami, especially because of his stronger libido and his greater shamelessness. When we were receiving our mission, he handed it to us while Yuki was ing him off. Stated Haku with a slightly jealous tone in her voice. At least you get to see him more than I do. Responded Sayuri with a pout and no small amount of jealousy in her voice. That is until Haku decided to fix her mood by kissing her on the lips. Yup, all of Naruto's girls were bisexual and had no problem pleasuring each other when Naruto wasn't there to pleasure them. With Hikari, Fugaku, and Zabuza. Currently Hikari was swinging her chains at Zabuza along with her chakra chains in order to skewer him for using a sweetened jutsu on her. Zabuza was keeping up with her rather easily and was able to deflect all of her chains with the two tanto he had sealed into his arms. He had these in case it would be a better decision to use them than his huge sword. Plus it doesn't take as much strength to use them. Fugaku had just arrived when Zabuza had jumped back and formed hand signs for his signature jutsu. Ninpo. Kurigakure no Jutsu. Yelled out Zabuza as he covered the entire area with a large amount of mist. This of course caused Fugaku to deactivate his Sharingan and channel chakra into his ears as he and Hikari stood back to back. Zabuza was a master at the silent killing technique, meaning that any hope of hearing his footsteps would be slim at best. Luckily he was able to hear a footstep right next to him that was not from Hikari and was able to block his downward sword strike. Too bad that Zabuza was strong enough that his blade simply cut through his kunai within a matter of seconds, cutting through his Junin vest and piercing skin. Luckily for him the cut wasn't too deep but would leave a scar nonetheless. Hikari took this opportunity to trap one of Zabuza's arms with her chains, thinking that he wouldn't be able to carry his large sword with only one free arm, and then sent her other chain to try and pierce his shoulder. That is until it was blocked by his Kubikirikocho and her chain around his arm was cut off, but the chain was still around his arm, simply separated from the rest of her chain. That is until it turned into liquid metal and reattached itself to the rest of her chain. This earned her a "What the did you just do, look." Hehe, I guess you didn't know. I have a rare Kekkei Genkai called the Metal Release. It allows me to not only create metal out of the earth, but I can control any metal within a certain range. However, for some strange reason I am unable to control the metal inside of your blade. This leads me to believe that you have placed a seal on your blade preventing anyone except for certain people to use it, and by extension the metal it is comprised of. Am I correct? Stated Hikari, causing Zabuza's eyes to widen by a considerable margin. This girl was able to deduce the alterations had placed onto his blade thanks to Naruto, not that she knew it was him, and knew that it was a seal. Naruto had told him there were only few seal masters that could do this simply within a few seconds. Their levels are at least 8 and the highest is 10 for them to be able to deduce that quickly. Level 10 seal masters are able to see every single piece of a seal and what they mean. So far there are only 3 level 10 seal masters currently alive. One of them is Kushina Uzumaki, who became a level 10 seal master a year after Naruto had left Konoha. Naruto was the second level 10 seal master that was currently alive and had become a level 10 seal master a year before fully becoming the Jubi no Okami. The last level 10 seal master alive was another red-haired Uzumaki that was under the control of Orochimaru. The only reason she didn't use her seals against him was because he could kill her before she could. Minato was only a level 9 seal master and Jiraiya was only a level 8 seal master. They were both satisfied with their current level of expertise in the field. However, the difference between a level 9 and a level 10 was enormous. If one were to compare a level 9 with a level 10, it would be like comparing the difference in strength between wolf and a rabbit. When one reached level 10, the possibilities were as endless as their chakra pools. When you reached level 10, you would be able to create seals anywhere out of pure chakra and could alter their range depending on how much chakra you had. Once you reached level 10, you could change environments, create creatures of the elements, and even for as long as they can supply chakra control nature itself. Hikari was currently a level 7 seal master and was making her way up to level 8. She was able to discern what could and could not be caused by a seal. While this seal was rather difficult to make, it was rather easy to make for those level 8 and higher. There were very few that could have been able to make this seal, meaning that there were other seal masters within Uzugakure. Little did she know that the Uzukage made it a requirement for a ninja to be at least a level 4 seal master by the time they were genin. After that they could choose whether or not to continue advancing in the art. Most if not all of his nins decided to continue to work on seals whether or not they went slow or fast in their progress. In Konoha the average Junin ninja was a level 5 seal apprentice at best. Meaning that they were at least able to seal weapons inside of scrolls and make explosive tags, but that was the most they could do. Anyways, back to the fight. Zabuza, having gotten over his initial shock, had sheathed his blade and went through hand signs as fast as he could. Water suddenly began to surround his body. Sweden. Water Dragon no Jutsu. Yelled out Zabuza as the water around him formed a large dragon's head that charged towards Hikari. Hikari in response began to grab one of her pre-made seals in order to defend herself. The dragon neared closer and closer. She was about to activate the seal until the dragon was turned into ice mere feet in front of Hikari. When she looked to her left, she saw Haku with several wolves made of ice surrounding her. Each of the wolves had glowing blue eyes and each had 3 tails that released a chakra-filled mist that ate up the chakra of those trapped inside of it, except for those the caster allows to go unaffected by it. This mist also the chakra out of any jutsu, though depending on the jutsu would depend whether or not it would extinguish the jutsu. This jutsu was known as Hyouten, Ice Wolves Haze of Death. Naruto helped with developing this. It was a Hyouten version of Naruto's chakra wolves that were just as deadly if not more. Alright, now that I have your attention, I propose a truce. Why don't we just go our separate ways, complete our missions, and not get in each other's way? Asked Haku as her wolves began to release more of the mist, creating a deadlier appearance as the ice on their teeth slightly melted, causing the drops to seem like the drool a predator would release when waiting to jump at its prey. Seeing the hungry looks on the wolves' faces, Fugaku decided that it was time for them to pull back. That and Naruto would not like it if he found out that his subordinates and those he considered as his family try to kill each other. So he decided that agreeing to Haku's terms was the best course of action. Alright, we will accept this terms. We will be taking out leave now, stated Fugaku as he started walking back towards the rest of the group. Though Hikari didn't want to retreat, she understood that if she disobeyed any other orders that she would seriously be reprimanded and possibly even removed from the ninja corps. Disobedience was not tolerated, and if she continued ignoring his orders, then things would end badly for her. So she relented and followed her sensei back to the group. And you just couldn't help but be the mature one and just take the ing high road, could you too, San? Yelled out Haku as her hair began waving around her back as her wolves directed their attention towards the now pale Zabuza. The moment he dared to look into his daughter's eyes, he knew that he wouldn't get out of this without getting a few new scars. Unless, well, it's just since Naruto ordered us to take out any threat that may come up during the mission, I was merely following orders. After all, you have to follow the Uzukage's orders, right? Said Zabuza as he began praying inside of his mind to Kami, hoping that she would buy that excuse. HMPH. Fine, I'll let this go just this once, but if you do that again without my approval, then I'll tell Meika-san. Said Haku with a dark smirk on her face. Zabuza immediately saw his entire life flash before his eyes as his mind processed what Haku had just said. If he thought that Haku was a devil, then his wife Mei was Jigoku, hell, in high heels. If he pissed her off and she so happened to be on her special day of the month, then he could very well be sent to the hospital for a good year or so. After a few minutes, Zabuza returned to the world of the living and immediately went down on his knees and begged Haku not to tell her mother. Luckily for him, she agreed on the condition that he teach her how to use Kubikirikocho. He knew she had a fascination with his blade and wanted him to hand it down to her. Of course he didn't want to that because 1. He would be out of a badass blade, and 2. He didn't want her to grow up too fast. Too late. Back in Uzugakure. Currently Naruto was having his clones do his paperwork while he and Yuki were planning their wedding. Naruto and Haku had already finished planning their wedding about a week ago because Yuki couldn't decide on what kind of cake she wanted. Haku just went with a white chocolate 7-tier cake so that they could feed all of their guests. The rest of the details would be a surprise. Now with Yuki, she was trapped between choosing either a red velvet cake or a triple vanilla cake. So then Naruto came up with a great idea. Hey, Yuki Haim, how about we have the chef make it a sort of compromise? Suggested Naruto as he tried to please his soon-to-be wife with the cake section. How about we have the chef make one tier red velvet and another triple vanilla and so on and so forth? Stated Naruto with a smile on his face, inwardly hoping that she agreed so that they could finally be done with the wedding planning. He swore that if he wasn't a god and didn't already have silver hair, it would all be white by now. You know what, I think that's a good idea. Besides, this way I don't have to make you use your godly powers to combine the flavors of red velvet and triple vanilla. Stated Yuki with an innocent smile on her face, while Naruto had an, "Are you kidding me?" look. Though he destroyed the look almost as quickly as it appeared so as not to have Yuki change her mind. Nope, he wasn't going through that shit again in one day. He could take on whole countries full of ninja, yet he met his match in planning weddings. After that horrible incident was over, he and Yuki decided to take a walk around the village while his clones finished up the paperwork for the day. Kami, how he loved shadow clones. They looked like the ideal couple walking down the street. The villagers and ninja alike would bow and smile in their direction. This man had saved their lives from the terror of Yagura and had given them a safe place to live in that was impossible to find without having a specific preplaced seal already on them. And if any of his ninjas were to try and leave the village, he would immediately be notified through his seals, and these could only be deactivated by himself. He would give them a chance to go back and continue being a nin, become a civilian, or be wiped from the face of existence. There would be no leaving the village with any of its secrets. If one chose to become a civilian, then they would have their mind cleared of any of their signature seals and jutsu that one could only learn in Uzu. Of course, so far nothing like that has happened, and he hoped that it would never have to happen. Anyways, as they were walking, Naruto noticed 3 10-year-old children walking towards him and his wife. Hey little ones, is there something you would like to tell me? Asked Naruto as he lowered himself down to his point of view. He knew that children preferred it when they looked them in the eye and got down to their size. When I grow up, I'm gonna take away that hat of yours and become the greatest Uzukage ever. Stated the child in the middle as his friends to his sides nodded their heads with smiles on their faces. I'm gonna grow up to be the greatest strategist. Stated the one on the right, pushing up his glasses, causing them to shine with some random light and a sparkle on the side. And I'm gonna be one of the greatest kunoichi ever. Yelled out the girl to the left as she did a peace sign with a huge grin on her face. Though this statement got a confused look on Naruto's face. Oh, and why not the best? Asked Naruto with a confused look on his face. Because I know that there will always be someone out there better than me. And I just have to train hard to make sure there is less and less of those people out there. Stated the girl with a smile on her face. In response, she got her head and her friends' heads rubbed by Naruto and a bone-crushing hug from a certain vixen, screaming out, "Kawaii." No longer able to refrain from doing so since the beginning of the conversation. You are a smart girl for your age. And to all of you, don't ever give up on your dreams and train hard. I look forward to the day I hand you my hat, got it, Gaki? Said Naruto with a grin on his face. The academy students immediately did a cheer and went on their way to do whatever it is they were going to do. Of course, this was the moment a certain vixen of Naruto's decided to tease him a little bit. You can look into the face of what can be considered impossible odds for normal people, yet when facing 3 kids that look at you in admiration, you start to freak out. Don't try to deny it. While you may have put up a good front, I could tell by your heartbeat that you were freaking out. Stated Yuki with a grin on her face as an embarrassed blush spread across Naruto's face. And it stayed that way for a few moments before Naruto finally had enough and simply flashed them to their destination and tickled her sides to oblivion. Very few people knew this, but Yuki was extremely ticklish, and just about every point in her body could be used against her in a tickle war, which was happening right now just as they crashed onto the couch. Hey, don't have at your in-laws' house. yelled May as she noticed them tickling each other and knew how this would probably end if the boy's change in tickle spot was any indication. His right hand was moving higher and higher up the inner of her thigh while his left hand was going higher up her chest. At least her statement got the reaction she was looking for. Naruto and Yuki shot away from each other with rather large blushes on their faces. While they were both rather shameless to an extent, they weren't really too keen on having May watch them have. So May-chan, how's your day been going so far? Asked Naruto with only a light shade of pink dusting his cheeks now. While he may have merged with Okami and become a lot more shameless than before, he wasn't one for open exhibition unless it was simply Yuki giving him a simple blowjob in the middle of work. Well, it was going pretty good until I see you to flash into my home and begin the preparations for having on my couch. As you can probably imagine, that can really ruin someone's mood. Stated May with a smile that was all too innocent as an image of a demon appeared behind her. We can explain. Tried to explain Yuki as even she began to sweat a little bit. Whenever May got angry, she knew you only had two options. Option 1 was to try and explain things to her, hoping that she understood and spared you of her wrath. Option 2 was to simply give up and hope she didn't kill. Of course, there was a third option available only to a certain Zabuza Momochi. Too bad it seemed they might have to put up with option 2. Now with Hikari, Sayuri, Hinata, and Fugaku. Currently Team 7 was escorting their client to his home in order to protect his family as well in case Gato decided to target them as well. Hinata and Sayuri were traveling in relative silence, though one could see the small smile on Sayuri's face if they really looked. Fugaku was currently glaring at a certain redhead for disobeying orders while said redhead was shrinking away from his glare. Literally, somehow her body was actually shrinking under his gaze as if hoping to disappear. Luckily for her, they had just arrived to Tazuna's house. Unfortunately for them, however, what laid before them was not a positive sight. When they arrived at the house, they saw that everything inside was completely destroyed, and Tazuna noticed that two people were missing. His daughter Tsunami and his grandson Inari were gone. Done. I think I'll just end it there and have you all suffer wondering what happened to the two and why I made this chapter so short. But I can't do that, so I just have to power through and get this chapter done, since that was what I set out to do. With Tsunami and Inari. Where are we? Where have you taken us? Yelled out Tsunami, demanding to know where they were. She was currently hugging her son close to her body as she felt him cry into her chest. While she wasn't much better, she had to try to be strong, at least for him. Oh, you two are simply my hostages, if you will, and will remain to be until that damn bridge builder either stops his project or until he is dead. Whichever comes first, and since according to a few of my subordinates he seems to have some rather strong bodyguards of his own, it seems like it will be the former. Don't worry, you won't be harmed much, said Gato as he left, laughing as the two had fearful expressions on their faces. They had no hope now. Their father might have brought ninja with him, but at this point they couldn't believe that they would be able to stop Gato. Gato was unstoppable. Gato was undefeatable. Gato controlled them. With each thought, the light in their eyes slowly died away. Let's hope that they can be saved before the light completely goes out. With Zabuza and Haku, both were now walking through the broken town filled with the broken souls of the citizens of Wave. They were hidden under henges and were also wearing cloaks covering their entire bodies except for their eyes. As they viewed the destroyed town around, they could not help but feel their hearts reach out to them. Of course, this only made them want to kill Gato even more now. They were about to try and sense Gato's location using Haku's sensor skills until they saw a couple of thugs trying to rob a store of all of its earnings, even though it was obvious it hadn't made any going by its condition. So they did the first thing that popped into their heads. Kill the first thug that was about to rape the female store clerk and interrogate the one that was about to hit the elderly man. 5 minutes later, they came out of the store with a grateful store clerk and elderly man, along with the corpses of two of Gato's men. They then proceeded to head towards Gato's mansion, which in retrospect shouldn't have been missed by their ninja abilities. When they arrived at the front gate, they noticed that the mansion itself was a purple color with at least 7 stories in height, along with only 2 overly muscular thugs acting as the guards. To a normal civilian they might have seemed menacing, but to 2 ninjas who could sense that these 2 barely had genin-level capabilities, they were nothing more than ants beneath their feet. "Hey, where the hell do you 2 think you're going?" stated Guard A, mustering up all the killing intent he could, which was barely more than a seasoned genin. Yup, these 2 were Ed completely, and they didn't even know it. Oh, if only they knew just who they were messing with, then would have simply sliced their own jugulars right then and there. "Well, we were thinking of going inside of that stupid mansion, killing anyone that gets in our way, and finally killing Gato. Maybe even saving a few people he has trapped in there along the way," said Zabuza with a bloodthirsty grin on his face as both he and Haku dropped their henge and threw their cloaks. The moment the 2 guards saw Zabuza's bandaged face, they immediately knew that they were Ed. Doesn't mean that they were just gonna let him kill them with ease. So they did the only thing that they could do. Run away like little bitches. Before they could even get 5 feet away, they were immediately cut into pieces and painted the rugs on the floor red with their blood. That was the sight the guards on the inside were met with. Needless to say, there were a few that thought that they could take these 2 on, there were a few that actually tried running away, and there were even a few that soiled themselves upon recognizing just who the huge man with the equally huge sword now resting on his shoulder. "Let the massacre begin," yelled out Zabuza as he rushed forward towards all the prey in front of him. Haku merely sighed as she decided to simply let her father have his fun. So she simply decided to find a piece of wall and grabbed out a completely black book as she began to giggle perversely as a blush spread across her cheeks. The author of said book was Naruto Okami, and his profits from just that one book he wrote was equal to the total profits Jiraiya made from 3 of his books. Why? Because unlike Jiraiya, Naruto actually had female customers that weren't just his mates. The title of his book was Arrow Okami, the rare identical twins situation, and he was currently writing his 2nd book, which has yet to have a designated title. But knowing Naruto, it will probably be better than the first one. Currently inside of the mansion of Gato, there were only 3 sounds to be heard: screaming, laughter, and perverse giggling. This continued for another 15 minutes as Zabuza cut down all of the pathetic ants trying to stop him from reaching Gato. Too bad they all failed and merely added to the growing pile of corpses. After another half hour of looking for the right room, they found Gato in what looked like his bedroom, sleeping. That midget was sleeping. Needless to say, Zabuza was pissed off, so he did what seemed like the logical thing to do. He cut off the Ur's right hand. That sure as hell woke the asshole up. "Ah, my hand. Oh Kami, my hand," screamed out Gato as he held his new stump that was squirting out blood everywhere. He was then lifted off the ground by his hair and was forced to look at Zabuza in the eye. "Now listen here, you little shit. You are first going to show me where all your prisoners are, and then you are going to show where your vaults are. And if you cooperate, I might just spare your pathetic little life, am I understood?" asked Zabuza with a demon-like aura surrounding him, leaving no room for a denial. "You understood," stammered out Gato as he did as he was told. He first showed them his bank vaults and tried to bribe them with his money. That earned him the loss of the rest of his forearm up to his elbow being cut off by Zabuza and then frozen by Haku to prevent him from bleeding out. The only reason he wasn't passed out right now was because every time he passed out, Zabuza would simply kick, punch, or stab him awake. So now he was guiding them down into the basement, which had all of the cells filled with prisoners. He had a total of 74 prisoners, and most of them were the able-bodied men from the village along with a few wives and children. Some of the women were currently while covered in what could only be semen, their eyes showing that they were dead on the inside, having given up to their fate long ago. However, there were a few women that were untouched as of yet, probably due to them being recently kidnapped. Among these few lucky women was Tsunami alongside her son Inari. As soon as Haku had gazed her eyes upon the forms of the raped women, she completely skewered Gato in Hyouden bonds which froze him wherever they pierced until he was completely converted into ice and was then smashed into pieces via Haku's huge Hyouden hammer. Once she killed Gato, she created a few Hyouden clones while Zabuza created a few Sweden Mizu Bunshin in order to take care of the prisoners and victims of Gato's men and Gato himself. The clones then each led a few prisoners at a time and led them out of the mansion and back into the small village. Once the last two villagers were out, Zabuza retrieved a small piece of paper that had a complex seal on it and placed it in front of Gato's vaults. He then placed a small amount of his chakra inside of the seal to activate it. Almost as soon as he had activated it, Naruto had appeared in a flash of silver and black and some white. They saw that Yuki was right beside him and that she was currently trying to stop the world from spinning. Damn I at Naru Koi. Why you know how much I hate using that damn Harishin. Stated Yuki as she leaned on Naruto trying to keep from falling on her. It took all of Naruto's extreme and merciless training to prevent him from laughing at his mate. Alright, now that you've summoned me, I can only expect that you have completed with phase 1 of the plan. Asked Naruto as he analyzed the vaults, calculating how much of what was in there was from Wave's citizens and how much was from Gato's own profits. After doing that, a dark grin large enough to nearly split his face had appeared on his face, causing shivers to run up the spines of the citizens of Konoha with a few exceptions. It is time we begin phase 2. Stated Naruto before his maniacal laughter began to reverberate around the mansion. Of course, it wasn't long till the other three joined him though. With Hikari, Sayuri, Hinata and Fugaku. Currently the four Konoha nin were trying to calm down their hysteric client, who was currently trying to find anything he could use to go up to Gato's mansion and burn it to the ground after killing the midget bastard who dared hurt his daughter and his grandson. He had nearly done the same thing after the death of his son-in-law Kaiza. Of course, whatever they were trying to say to calm him down was not working at all. While they could each hold him back with a simple pinky, they didn't feel right in doing so. After all, he was just trying to get his daughter back, and Fugaku could honestly say that he would do the same if their positions were reversed. Look, Tazuna-san, we will get your daughter back. We just need you to calm down and tell us where Gato is and we will do the rest. Said Fugaku as he held down the man. Thankfully, he finally decided to listen to reason. He stopped resisting them and decided to listen to them. That is until Tsunami and Inari suddenly walked inside of the house, being escorted by one Zabuza and one Haku. At first, the ninja were at the ready in case of an attack, while Tazuna merely rushed towards his remaining family and hugged them with such strength that they would think he was 20 again. You're alright. Are you hurt? What did Gato do to you? If he hurt either of you, so help me, I'll rip out. Started out yelling Tazuna before he was silenced by a frying pan to the head thanks to one Tsunami. Dad, we're fine. These kind ninja saved us from Gato and the girl killed him before our very eyes. Gato is finally dead. We're finally free. Said Tsunami as she began to sob tears of joy into her father's chest, wishing that her husband were here now to see this. Thank you too for saving out country. If there is anything Nami no Kuni can do for you, please do not hesitate to ask. Said Tazuna with joyful tears rolling down his cheeks. It was no trouble. We were planning on killing Gato anyway, so saving your family was simply a result of that. But since you're offering, we do have one request. Stated Haku as she smiled innocently and spoke in smooth silky voice in order to calm the family down. Of course. Anything. Yelled out Tazuna happily. Well, you see, I was thinking about a trading agreement between our two contracts. Of course, the person in charge of this country would meet with our Uzukage and work out an agreement where both of our countries would prosper. Stated Haku doing that cute girly peace pose. Imagine that pose Kirito did in episode 9 of Sword Art Online 2. God damn, that was scary to watch. If you ask why, then you have not seen Sao 1 and must watch it. This of course froze Tazuna in shock. These ninja first save his family, kill of Gato, and now want to establish a trading contract that could potentially save their country from poverty. This was too much for the old man to handle and he passed out with his soul escaping through his mouth. And with that everyone in the room did a faceplant before recovering moments later and simply conversing as they waited for Tazuna to wake up. Inari was staring at Zabuza with stars in his eyes and asked to show him how he used that amazing sword of his. Tsunami and the girls were talking about those strange things girls talk about when it was just them girls talking. Fugaku simply sat down on the couch and began to drift off. Several weeks later back at Konoha. It had been 1 week since Fugaku and his genin team returned to Konoha upon the completion of their mission. They had gone straight to the cage tower in order to tell him about all that had happened during their mission and what they were able to learn about the revival of Uzugakure. Unfortunately, when they arrived, Kushina happened to be there with Minato talking about something completely unrelated to what they were about to talk about. Fugaku and Team 7 reporting on the success of their first C-rank mission. Stated Fugaku immediately going into professional mode. He was inwardly hoping, however, that he would be able to go back to the Uchiha compound in order to explain to them that Phase 2 had begun and that it was time for them to prepare. Alright, let's hear it, said Minato, not caring about whether or not his wife was in the room. He would come to regret that within a few moments. Yes, Hokage-sama. However, it would be best if Kushina-san sat down. We learned a few things on our mission that she might want to hear and will be a large surprise for her and you, said Fugaku as he waited for Kushina to do as he asked. Once she did, he began to recount all the events that had occurred during their mission. From their encounter with Zabuza to the death of Gato. When he spoke of Uzu, Kushina immediately began assaulting him with questions about who was ruling over her homeland that fell during the Third Great Ninja War. Of course, she was told by her husband to let Fugaku finish his mission report. As she was told about the abilities of the apprentice of Zabuza and the village that they hailed from, they decided that the best course of action was to place her in the bingo book. What worried Minato was the contract that Nami no Kuni and Uzugakure had signed. This could potentially have a negative outcome for Konoha. After finishing his report on their encounters with Zabuza and his apprentice and telling them everything that happened after they were allowed to leave, Kushina had a troubled look on her face. Kushi-chan, I know that you're worried about your homeland, but you shouldn't worry. I will send some you along with a few of my personal Anbu for you to locate Uzu. When you find it, I need you to give them this envelope. It contains an invitation to the next Chunin exams, which is being held here in a month, stated Minato as he tried to comfort his wife. He understood how much this meant to her, so he would give her the chance to do recon on this revival of Uzugakure. He would send Hikari, but she needed to be trained for the Chunin exams and she wasn't at Anbu level yet. Thanks, Mina Koi. I'll be getting my things ready. Send an Anbu for me once everyone is here besides myself, said Kushina as she kissed her husband before heading out the window and towards her home. It would be a few hours before they would leave, and when they did, they'd be in for a big surprise once they arrived at their destination. With Team 7. Currently, Team 7 was having dinner at the Uchiha compound as a small celebration for the completion of their first C-rank mission, which might have been bumped up to an A- rank if Zabuza and his apprentice had been sent against them instead of helping them, if you could call it that. They were eating onigiri with bowls of red rice along with some rather delicious mochi that Makoto Uchiha was famous for. While she may have been a dangerous woman, that didn't mean that that was the only thing she was famous for. If she wanted to, she could have opened a restaurant that only sold mochi and she would have become rich within a month. Within a year, everyone from the elemental countries would have traveled to Konoha simply to get a taste of her delicious food. Of course, her family and friends got this for free, much to the anguish of others. Especially a certain perverted sage, due to him once peeping on Makoto at the hot springs. Yup, he didn't leave the hospital for a full 3 months and had to go through rehabilitation for a couple weeks due to his muscles atrophying during that time in the hospital. If anyone asked him about it or reminded him about it, he would involuntarily fall to his knees and slam his head to the ground various times, bowing, yelling out, "I'm sorry." Each time his head hit the ground, he would then be re-administered into the hospital for severe concussions. So that seems like it was quite the interesting mission. You four are so lucky. When I was a genin, the first mission we got was the damn Tora mission. That ing cat was so annoying. I swear that the only way it could have outrun Ninja would have been if it was the boss summon for the cat contract. Stated Makoto with barely hidden jealousy and a cute pout on her face. This of course caused her family to sweat drop at her actions while the rest simply chuckled. Congratulations Imouto on your first mission as a genin, and San, are you thinking on nominating them for the Chunin exams? Asked Itachi as he ate his pocky that was somehow the same flavor as the food they were eating. Of course they had all gotten used to this by now, so no one commented on it. Of course Itachi. Do you even need to ask? They are some of the finest ninja this village has ever seen, and they are only genin. If I could, I would nominate them for the Junin exams, but thanks to the requirements needed for the possible promotion. Stated Fugaku as stole one of Itachi's pocky as punishment for asking such a stupid question. And of course Itachi was now crouching in a random corner of the living room with a cloud of depression over his head, raining down pocky of sadness. And once again, since this was a regular occurrence, no one questioned this. Anyways, thanks to Itachi inadvertently reminding me about the Chunin exams, I need to give you three the forms for the exams so that you can sign them and so that I can turn them into the Hokage. Said Fugaku as he gave each of his students a pink paper that only had room for a signature, blood sample, and chakra sample. Within 10 seconds of the documents leaving his hands and entering the hands of the girls, the documents were once again placed in his own hands. After blinking a few times, he chuckled and then placed them into his pocket. I should have seen this coming, thought Fugaku as he continued to eat his wife's deliciously made meal. After dinner at the Uchiha household, it had been a few moments ago when the members of Team 7 that were not of Uchiha blood had left towards their respective households. It had also been a few moments ago that the house of a certain family of Uchiha had been emptied. The only thing signifying their leaving was a certain staircase missing all of its steps, revealing a passageway hidden beneath. The entire hidden base stretched throughout all of Konoha. Why under all of Konoha instead of just the Uchiha compound? Why, that's simple. The Uchihas weren't alone in their support of Naruto. There were others who believed in him. There were others in Konoha who believed that Konoha was a mere shadow of what it once was. There were those that believed that it was time for Konoha to be redeemed for its transgressions. There were those that were willing to do what was needed in order to bring back Konoha's honor. After all, what is a more honorable way to die than through the throes of battle? These bringers of justice, these preachers of equality, these people of the shadows all called themselves by one name. Their names were the Kage no Shisai, or the priests of the shadows. For they were the ones that were born in the shadows of Konoha and thrived within it. They lived within the shadows and they became strong through their suffering. They were taught the way of the true shadows, not the shadows that the leaders of the villages claimed to be. Shadows did not shine in the spotlight. Shadows were not heroes told about in stories. Shadows hid in the darkness waiting for the time to strike. Shadows did not fight with egos or fairness. Shadows fought without remorse. Shadows fought without mercy. Shadows fought without restraint, and most of all, shadows fought without weakness. Each and every shadow wore the same uniform. They wore black skin-tight long-sleeve shirts with black gloves. On the left arm were pieces of armor similar to the kind worn before the creation of the hidden villages, while the right arm was covered in white bandages. The same armor was worn on their chests and abdominal regions. They also wore black skin-tight pants that was also covered in the same armor. For footwear they wore black combat boots. On top of all of that, they wore black cloaks that completely covered their body and had seals placed on it to hide their chakra signatures, their heartbeats, their scent, their very existence. The last piece to their uniform was the robotic metal mask resting on their faces. Its glowing red eyes and menacing look, along with the random bursts of steam that were released from the sides of the mask, caused most that laid their eyes upon it to shake in terror. They were standing in a semicircle, a total of 13 members preset within their order. They were all standing in front of a throne that soon began to be covered in darkness until a figure was revealed. This figure was completely different from the others in the room. The figure was basically shirtless and wore a fur coat to somewhat cover his chest. He wore black gauntlets with strange red leather wraps on them. He wore black pants with black combat shoes. His hair reaching to just below his shoulders with equal parts of black and silver. Covering his face was a mask resembling that of a fox. He had 2 wolf ears on top of his head and 10 wolf tails moving behind him with a life of their own. One ear was silver with a black tip while the other was black with a silver tip. The tails were all silver with black tips. This man was their leader. The one who showed them the truth of this place and taught them about the secrets of the shadows after living within them for so long. This man was both their leader and teacher. Friend and, only to one, a lover. He was the one they owed a great debt to and they were each determined to fulfill it. Greetings Okami-sama, said each of the members as they got down to one knee. The mark hidden beneath their bandages glowing ever so slightly. This mark was the mark that symbolized their group. Rise, stated their leader without any emotion. Now I believe it is time for the meeting to begin. Firstly, as you all should have known by now, is that the second phase of the plan has begun and that it is time to begin Konoha's fall into hell. However, there is a slight annoyance that will need to be dealt with. It seems as though Orochimaru has decided to invade Konoha during the Chunin exams with the help of Suna. I will prevent this. This will not hinder any of you in any way, so I recommend each of to move forward as planned. Stated their leader. Hi, rang out through the hidden chamber. As they all began to leave, one of them was called back in order to speak to the leader of the cage no Shisai. Remove your mask, said simply the fox-masked wolf. The member did as it was told and removed its mask, allowing its hair to cascade in front of her chest. Her black hair is beautiful as the night sky, unblemished by any stars. You have served me well along with your family. Do not worry, for they will be spared, soothed the leader as he let his hand affectionately rub her cheek. You need not fear for their safety, for they will be protected. Besides, they need only to travel through our tunnels to arrive to Uzu. So don't worry, my dear. You have served me well along with your family. Do not worry, for they will be spared, soothed the leader as he let his hand affectionately rub her cheek. You need not fear for their safety, for they will be protected. Besides, they need only to travel through our tunnels to arrive to Uzu. So don't worry, my dear. Hanabi Imouto consoles Naruto as he caresses her cheek in order to soothe her worries into submission. All we need is for the branch family to follow you into Uzu, where they will be received with open arms. And you know that the moment they step within the tunnels, they are forever outside of Konoha's clutches. Besides, you'll be the one with the pleasure of ending the tyrannical reign of the main branch family, as their shocked expressions try to make sense of why their precious and perfect Hanabi Haim is the one killing them without so much as breaking a sweat. Added Naruto as he grabbed her chin ever so gently and showed his Cheshire grin in an effort to completely vaporize her remaining uncertainties. This of course had the desired effect on his adorable Imouto. Really? I get to kill those old, fat ers? Asked Hanabi with her white eyes shining with what many would call innocent mischief. You're the best, Naru ni. Now unfortunately you have to go back to playing the condescending Hyuga princess for a little while longer until it begins. Stated Naruto with a slight frown before he kissed her forehead and dismissed her. Now that he was alone, he decided there was no further need for him to stay there. A few minutes after she was out of sight, several seals surrounded Naruto out of nowhere before causing a dark cloud to begin consuming Naruto's being. The last thing anyone would be able to see of Naruto was his sadistic, bloodthirsty grin that ensured nothing but delicious and satisfying suffering to those that went against him. With the Uzumaki Namikaze family. Currently, Minato Namikaze was doing paperwork inside of his office within the cage tower of Konoha. Now normally he would be using cage buncheons to help him speed through his work, but he was going through one of his depression periods. These started immediately after he was woken up from his genjutsu-induced coma. They would start randomly throughout his day, but there would be some days spread sparsely throughout where he had no such feelings of depression. However, today was not one of those days. While he was doing his paperwork, there was apparently a new holiday that the civilian council desired to have passed. The holiday would ensue approximately 1 week before the actual anniversary of Naruto's escape from Konoha and would allow the civilians and any ninja that wanted to join to burn a Kyuubi, with Naruto on top of its head. The moment Minato finished reading the article, he quickly shredded it into tiny particles of paper with his wind element and finally used his mastery over his wind element to cause the particles of shredded paper to flow into the garbage where it turned to ash. There were special seals marked within the trash can using chakra in order to cause any documents that fell inside to be instantaneously turned to ash for safety reasons. He then sent the Anbu to go and pick up the civilian councilman that tried to get such a holiday passed, knowing that he was Naruto's father and was finally deciding to try and fix his relations with his son. That is until he escaped using such raw strength that not even Minato was capable of touching him. Now Minato was training alongside those he considered as family in order to bring Naruto back and show him that they had changed. As well as trying to change the public's opinion of Naruto, considering that for several years they were led, by their hate, to believe that Naruto was the Kyuubi reincarnated in a human body. While over time he had received great support and now over 70% of the overall population believed that Naruto was in fact human and that he was the victim, he still currently had approximately 30% that believed he had been corrupted by the demon spawn, and they were the saviors of their holy village. Also, about 2% of those 30% were rather wealthy families that lost family during the Kyuubi incident. These 2% sponsor the rest of the 30% into causing public riots and defacing public property with images of the heinous crimes they may commit on Naruto's person if he were ever to return. So for the past several years Minato was forced to deal with this on a nearly daily basis. However, he would merely take it in stride and hope that one day he could get these ignorant, hate-driven people to see reason without having to resort to violence. Why? Because that was the penance he gave himself for all the pain he caused his firstborn child. With Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. Kushina was currently within her room getting ready for her quick trip to Uzu to deliver their invitation to the next Chunin exams that were being held within Konoha in a matter of months. Although Kushina had her own motives for wanting to go there. She wanted to make sure that Uzu was under Uzumaki control and not having its ancient clan secrets abused by some power-hungry fools that knew not what they were tampering with. That, and she was anxious to meet any family that could have also survived the Third Great Ninja War. So with those thoughts and hopes in mind, Kushina finished sealing all possible essentials that could be required and needed during this mission. She was wearing skin-tight black Anbu pants with blood-red shin guards and ninja sandals. For a top she wore a skin-tight black long-sleeve shirt with mesh armor underneath and arm guards that were a similar color to the shin guards. On her hands she wore black fingerless gloves with metal plates on the back part of the hand and on the palms. Her luscious crimson hair was done in a ponytail while her forehead protector was placed around her left leg. Now that she was ready, she quickly shunshined to the Hokage's office in order to receive the scroll along with her 2 other team members for the duration of the mission. Back at the Hokage's office, Minato was still dealing with his paperwork when Kushina suddenly used the shunshin to appear inside of his office, and to his apparent distress it was the regular standard Konoha shunshin, which while causing random leaves to appear also causes a small draft of wind to surround the user for a few moments. Now normally this wouldn't cause a problem, but since she appeared inside of a closed room and there were papers with nothing holding them down except for gravity causing all the papers to go flying everywhere. At the sight of dozens of documents flying every which way, Minato's face became blank before he suddenly began banging his head repeatedly on his desk, causing the wood to splinter every so often. Why do bad things always happen to good people? Blubbered Minato as he had anime-style tears flowing down his cheeks while a cloud symbolizing his righteous depression floated above his head. Now as all this is happening, Kushina is simply standing there with an embarrassed flush across her face, since it's her fault that he's like this and because she's married to that whining baby. Ahem, coughed out Kushina in slight irritation considering she was in a hurry. This immediately knocked Minato out of his depressions and sent him into cage mode. Junin Kushina Uzumaki, your mission is simple. You are to establish contact with the village of Uzu and ascertain whether or not they will be a threat to our village. This is under the guise of inviting them to the upcoming Chunin exams so as to extend friendly relations with their people in their cage. Explained Minato as he interlocked his fingers in front of his face, giving him a powerful and serious atmosphere. Kushina understood the grave importance of establishing friendly relations with Uzugakure, especially if it happened to be under the control of someone with foul intentions against Konoha or any of the other hidden villages. The fallout, both politically and physically, could prove to be catastrophic for not just Konoha but for the entirety of the elemental nations. Many would scoff at this, saying that a new village would be unable to cause such destruction, but if they were to hear the word Uzugakure in the same sentence, then they would automatically reach for the nearest weapon in reflex. Why, you ask? Because the ninja of Uzu were considered to be gods in human form. Their prowess in the field of seals was unparalleled and undeniable. And if the people of the new Uzu were able to learn from her ancestors' teachings and intended to use them for their own profit or worse, for revenge, then neither cage nor army would be able to stand in their way and hope to come out alive and in one piece. Understood, Hokage-sama, responded Kushina before grabbing her mission scroll and leaving through the open window. But before leaving, she quickly gave her husband a peck on the cheek and whispered something into his ear, causing his face to light up like a certain Hyuga princess when she is within the general vicinity of the Konoha public. It seemed as though that whatever Kushina whispered into his ear caused Minato to become re-energized, as he attacked the thread of paperwork with renewed vigor. Never noticing the fact that the amount of paperwork on his desk had increased by 100-fold. With Kushina, she had just exited the primary gate for entering and exiting Konoha moments ago and was heading towards the place closest to Uzu that was allies with Konoha and had access to boats capable of sailing all the way to the primary entrance to Uzu. Considering all those factors, only one logical option was left. The Land of Waves. Not only was it a measly 20 miles away from Uzu, but it also had friendly relations with both Konoha and Uzugakure. With this thought in mind, Kushina believed that they could use the Land of Waves to establish a peaceful treaty with Uzugakure and maybe gain access to her old family compound, which was at the edge of Uzu and contained several mementos from her youth. Her other motivation was the fact that Naruto may have found his way to Uzugakure and was either a civilian there or a ninja there. So with those thoughts in mind, her eyes shone with a flame of determination usually seen when she trains against her pupils and other fellow ninja. She was going to Uzugakure. She was going to where she was raised. She was going to find her first-born child. Unfortunately for her, he would not be as she had remembered him, for the child she remembered was but a mask created to survive. And now he no longer just survived. He was the hunter and everyone else was the prey. With Naruto. Naruto was currently training the team of genin that he planned on sending this year for the Chunin exams that he knew that Uzugakure was going to be invited to. The team consisted of Inari and only Inari. Yes, the very same Inari from the Land of Waves. Naruto saw much of his younger self within Inari and decided to make him his apprentice. The one who would eventually succeed him as heir to Uzu. Of course Inari knew not of this, but once Naruto felt that he was ready, he would tell him of his destiny. But for now Naruto was too busy enjoying beating the crap out of Inari to even consider telling him yet. And Inari was too busy having an intimate relationship with the ground to be able to hear Naruto tell him about his destiny anyways. Come on Gaki. Don't tell me you're tired already. We've only been training for 13 hours. Taunted Naruto with a sadistic grin on his face as his 10 tails moved around beside him in a playful manner. Oh, how he enjoyed torturing his precious pupil. This was always the highlight of his day. Shut up. Besides, you're only a few years older than I am. If you call me by that nickname, then I'll call you by yours. Yelled out Inari in frustration. Naruto simply laughed at Inari's supposed threat. Oh ray a l l l l l l y y y y y. And what nickname is that ga Ki-chan? Taunted Naruto once more as his grin grew even larger and his narrowed, giving him an impression a snickering fox. His sharpened teeth didn't help him either in trying to deny such a fact. You asked for it, Inu-sensei, yelled out Inari with a smirk on his face at his teacher's reaction. Naruto immediately froze in place. His tails were frozen, unmoving, and his eyes were shadowed by his hair. His grin had disappeared at this point and he only looked to have an impassive expression on his face. However, slowly a grin onto his face and his eyes once again became visible, eliciting a gasp from the young child as he paled in despair. While his face showed the innocence of a fox, his eyes showed the ferocity of a wolf. Inari, run. And run he did. For the next few hours all the people within the village would hear from the training grounds were the cries of pain and agony coming from a certain individual. Once Inari's punishment was over, Naruto decided to carry the poor brat over his shoulder as his tails moved around playfully and his grin shining ever so brightly, showing how rejuvenating it was to train his precious little apprentice. As he was walking through his village he was on the receiving end of many bows and smiles and the like. He would always return the bow, smile, and wave to each of his citizens. To him they were part of his family whether or not they shared the same blood as him. In many of the hidden villages there was a code that the shinobi and especially the kage were expected to follow. The village shall come first, family second. Naruto considered to be utter shit. His response to such a statement was, that shit. Family shall always come first here in Uzu. After all, what better family than the village that you protect and protects you right back? This of course caused his popularity to rise to fanatical levels as well, making him look like a man who cared for the lives of his family. It also helped that he was more than powerful enough to follow up on his promise of protecting his family. The ninja would often consider him like a second father or like an older brother no matter their age. His popular nickname amongst the ninja population was Oni-sama, especially amongst those below the rank of Chunin. Of course they are considered Chunin in the eyes of Uzu, but in comparison to the ninja in the other hidden villages these Chunin were as powerful as elite Junin. That thought only caused Naruto's grin to widen. Because if the Chunin could be considered Junin, then what would the Kage no Shisai be ranked? His precious pupils would easily be on a level far beyond those of the Anbu, and having transcended from the level of the Sannin would be able to easily defeat armies without so much as a scratch. They were however unable to defeat their Kage, but any other Kage they would most likely be able to defeat with only one missing limb as consequence, which Haku could then heal. Haku was the village's main healer and was training the ninjas of Uzu in the arts of medicine as well. Naruto had made intermediate healing capabilities a requirement for becoming Chunin, and after that point it became optional but recommended. This way casualties of Uzu Nin would be considerably lower than those of other villages. Unlike Konoha, Uzu trained the hell out of its academy students and made sure they were ready for the real world before even considering sending them out on missions. Now when considering this, one begins to wonder that if the regular students and ninja of Uzu were this powerful, then how is it that in such a short amount of time they were able to become so powerful? Well, Naruto easily explains this away to any outsider, saying that they are simply teaching these brats better than they are. However, the truth of the matter is that through the use of extremely high-level seals, Naruto was able to create an enormous hyperbolic time chamber which could house several hundred people at a time. One day outside the hyperbolic time chamber would equal a full month within it. This allowed the students to graduate from 4 years of the academy within a month and a half. At that point these students would not be allowed to return into the hyperbolic time chamber until they reached the rank of Chunin. Currently Naruto and Inari were not inside the hyperbolic time chamber, but Naruto's and Inari's shadow clones and blood clones were undergoing training within the hyperbolic time chamber in order to make sure Inari would decimate any opposition he may face in the Chunin exams. He was also planning on having Inari sign the summoning contract for the foxes. He knew Yuki would simply love to have Inari as her family's summoner and that Inari would fit in perfectly with the foxes. Maybe in a few more weeks once the Chunin exams start. Of course, by then any enemy he faces within the exam will forfeit the moment they're paired up with him. Ha 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 ha. Thought Naruto is made sure to not disturb Inari from his well-earned rest. Of course, that didn't stop him from playing with the boy's hair with one of his tails. Though this distracted him from where he was walking, making him crash into the door of his own house. Kami ing, damn it. Who the decided to put a ing door right in front of me? Groaned out Naruto as he rubbed his now comically swollen nose with a few tick marks on his head. That would have been you, Uzukage-sama, informed one of the wave operatives under his command as they attempted to hold back their laughter. One of them was standing perpendicular to a telephone pole a few feet away, another was upside down standing on the bottom part of the roof of the house that was sticking out at the edge, and the last one was right next to the door. In Uzu they had ninjas that were in most aspects similar to Anbu but much more powerful, and according to Naruto they were more badass in comparison to the Anbu. So he decided to name them Wave in honor of the village hidden in the waves which integrated into Uzu a few months ago. Now, although these wave operatives are powerful, they are nowhere near as powerful as the members of the Kage no Shisai. Yay, very funny. Let's all laugh at the most powerful being in existence just because he crashed into a door. Ranted Naruto in a sarcastic tone of voice as he continued to rub his bruised nose with an annoyed expression on his face. Anyways, didn't I tell you guys that you had the day off? After all, it's not like anyone is going to attack me here. And there is lesser chance still of me getting injured. I mean, after all, who could possibly injure the legendary Jubi no Okami? Asked Naruto rhetorically, not expecting an answer, though he still unfortunately received one. Anyo, probably an enemy whose signature weapon is doors. And if we aren't there to protect you from the wooden doors of evil, then what would happen to our frail Uzukage? Retorted the wave operative with the black mask that had an open mouth in the center and no other features. The rest of the wave were trying their hardest to contain their laughter, which was evident in the way they were holding their sides from the pain of laughing for long periods of time. This only served to annoy Naruto even further before a lightbulb randomly appeared above his head along with a mischievous smirk and glinting eyes on his face. Ah, so you like jokes, do you? Well then, here's a joke for you. You three get to be my secretaries for the next week. Have fun dealing with the paperwork. Yelled out Naruto as he entered his home, laughing maniacally while the three wave operatives simply stood there pale as pieces of paper with only one thought on their minds. With Kushina. Kushina was currently only a few minutes away from the entrance of the village hidden in the waves where her daughter and her team had gone through their first C-rank mission, even if the team from Uzu did all the heavy lifting. However, that wasn't what was plaguing her mind at the moment. No. At the moment Kushina was wondering if Naruto was somehow in Uzu as one of its ninja. While she knew that she shouldn't get her hopes up, she still allowed a small ray of hope to shine within her heart that was riddled with despair and agony. Maybe he had gotten into the village and was going to participate in the upcoming Chunin exams. That thought gave Kushina her second wind as she sped over to wave as fast as she could without the assistance of chakra, which, while no Metagai, was still pretty fast. However, once she arrived, the small village of Wave no longer looked to be as desolate or as broken as it once was. The village looked to be full of life and hope, with fishermen showing off their catches of the day and traders setting up shop in front of their boats to show off their wares. Apparently she had been standing there frozen for a little while since a random man in robes that looked to belong to royalty began walking up to her. He wore robes of a vibrant red with golden lining around the edges, as well as pants that were the same vibrant red with the same golden lining. For footwear he wore black wooden ghetto with golden swirls resembling whirlpools. He also wore a wooden rice hat on top of his head, obscuring most of his face from view but showing the gray beard to the red-headed kunoichi in front of him. Kushina used her sensor capabilities to determine whether or not the man before her was a threat. His chakra capacity was equal to that of an elderly man that lived his entire life as a civilian. She also felt no ill intentions coming from him but noticed an anomaly that drove a wave of fear deep into her heart. There was a seal of unknown origin, at least to her, that she had never seen before. However, that was not what truly frightened her. What truly caused fear to claw at her heart and mind was the fact that the seal was made of chakra and that it had somehow merged with the elderly man's chakra coils. For someone to create a seal from their own chakra, they had to be at least a level 7 seal master, but in order to have one merge with a man's own chakra coils is unheard of. Theoretically, it should be impossible, causing both the applier of the seal and the one who is receiving the seal to die, but yet here is living proof that the impossible has been done. Immediately Kushina stretched the boundaries of her sensing abilities and analyzed all of the other citizens within the vicinity. Her eyes widened in absolute terror. In each of the citizens, there was a seal placed in the exact same area. In the chakra coils around the right. The seal had the chakra coils flowing through it as well as around it. The chakra outside of the seal would be a light blue while the seal within was a shining silver. Clearly, whoever placed the seal was extremely skilled, extremely dangerous, and had silver chakra. And to be able to keep this many seals active simultaneously should be impossible for any human being, even if they were an Uzumaki. Hello, my name is Tazuna and I'm the head fisherman around these parts. Is there anything you need? Inquired Tazuna as he removed the hat, showing his facial features to the red-headed kunoichi before him. He had a simple pair of glasses with graying hair. He looked to be around 50 to 60 years of age and a recovering alcoholic considering the size of his belly and the stench on his breath, or rather lack thereof. Anyo, well, I was simply stunned by the beauty of the village. How is it possible that it was fixed and renovated so quickly? Questioned Kushina as she stood there amazed and transfixed with the complexity and wonder of Wave. Well, as you probably already know, Wave had a trading contract with Uzu which also included them assisting with our repairs. When I first read about that in the agreement, I thought that they would simply give us money to hire people, but instead the Uzukage himself helped rebuild most of the buildings you see here. Everything you see here is thanks to the generosity of Uzukage-sama. Explained Tazuna as he led Kushina to one of the nearby ports with a boat ready, seemingly waiting for her. Now before you ask, yes, we were expecting you. Uzukage-sama informed us that a Konoha nin would likely arrive soon. He also asked us to give you safe passage to Uzu so that you may deliver your message without further delays. Explained Tazuna as he noticed her caution towards the boat. Seeing that he was motioning for her to enter the boat, she climbed aboard with slight hesitance and her muscles noticeably tensed in readiness for anything that may happen. Once she was on deck, she analyzed her surroundings, noticing that there was a female ninja in a blue combat-type dress with long auburn hair and seafoam green eyes. She also had a bust that rivaled Kushina's. If Kushina wasn't bothered by this at all, if the twitching of her eyebrow was anything to go by. Aside from the auburn beauty in front of her, Kushina sensed no other ninja on board, causing her to visibly relax. Hello. My name is Mei Momochi and I shall be your guide to Uzugakure. Stated Mei with a bow at the end. I must say, Uzukage-sama predicted that you would be the one sent to deliver his invitation. He will be most pleased. Said Mei with a grin on her face. Her eyes glowed slightly with a devious glint in her visible eye. Her last statement caused Kushina to furrow her eyebrows and narrow her eyes. She had suspected that she might have been lured to a trap because of her heritage. However, she could not back down now. Even if it seemed like a trap, she couldn't abandon Uzu again. Of course he is. Now then, I would like to arrive before the sun goes down, if you please. Demanded Kushina in a somewhat polite version of a straightforward demand. Mei's only response was a smile that sent shivers down Kushina's spine. The lone visible green eye filled with amusement as well as an underlying layer of anger towards her. Her smile hiding the smug smirk her mind showed. However, without further ado, Mei had the ship's captain start heading towards one of Uzu's various entrances. Within a few hours they had arrived to what seemed to be the center of a large ocean with no signs of land within view. Kushina's eyebrows rose within her eyes were like purple rivers of confusion and internal turmoil as her muscles tensed and her fingers twitched towards the seals on her arms concealing her weapons. However, she soon noticed massive movement directly ahead of the boat. What she saw caused her eyes to widen in shock and slight terror mixed with hysteria. The boat was heading towards an enormous whirlpool. The entire ship was moments away from being destroyed by the whirlpool ahead, and none of the crew were doing anything to prevent the upcoming destruction. In fact, they were acting as though this were a normal occurrence rather than a life-ending disaster. Just as the ship reached the beginning of the whirlpool, they could feel the way it shifted suddenly in accordance to the strength of the whirlpool. Kushina immediately used chairs to keep her feet planted to the ship and covered her body in chairs' chains as a form of armor as reflex. She closed her eyes and brought up her arms to cover her face. She expected to hear the screams of the crew, the shredding of the wood, the destruction of life. She expected to feel the water surrounding her body, the ship breaking apart under her feet, and the chakra chains to shred apart from the force of the water. However, she neither heard nor felt any of those things. All she heard was laughter and muffled snickering. Her eyes immediately snapped wide open in shock as she immediately released her chains and stopped channeling chairs, noticing that the ship's crew along with May were either outright laughing at her, May, or covering their mouths with their hands to muffle their snickers. Everyone else. Ha 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 ha, that always gets the newcomers. Ha 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 ha, roared out May as she tried her best not to fall on her once more. The chakra chains erupted from Kushina's lower back like numerous golden tails waving around dangerously. But then her snarl turned into a gasp of surprise as she looked at her surroundings. Her chakra chains dissipated into thin air as she slowly dropped to her knees. Tears began flowing down her cheeks as she covered her mouth with both her hands. There were beautiful traditional Japanese houses everywhere with children running through the streets wearing kimonos and yukatas. There were ninja in the streets and on the roofs having conversations as well as spending time with their families. There were beautiful flowers everywhere. And straight ahead was the Uzukage Tower. Made of stone that showed no impurities, with hundreds upon thousands of seals placed upon it for not only the Uzukage's protection but for the protection of Uzu and its citizens as well. She was home. She could remember the times when she was a child running through those same roads. She could remember how her grandfather would show her the view of Uzu from the balcony of the tower. She remembered all of her family that had died in the invasion and all the friends she lost as a child. She remembered all the good memories as well as all the bad ones. However, despite all the pain, she couldn't help but smile at how Uzu was prospering now under its new Uzukage. She then recalled something that her grandfather once told her several years ago. Flashback no Jutsu. 30 years ago in Uzugakure. Currently Kushina was sitting on the railing of the balcony on the Uzukage Tower with her feet swinging over the edge, humming a tune to herself. Her face was slightly pudgy and her hair barely reached past her shoulders. She wore a loose burnt orange kimono with red linings. Her hair was tied back into a small ponytail with two bangs framing her face and a loose bang going down to her nose. Her eyes glimmered with a childlike innocence that would soon be lost to the horrors of war and humanity. She was smiling at the village unbeknownst to her of the dangers it would soon face. She was suddenly grabbed from behind and placed upon a man's shoulders. Squealing in delight, Kushina immediately knew who it was that had grabbed her from behind. Gigi. Kushina shrieked out in utter joy and happiness. Since both her parents had died before she could form a single lasting memory of either of them, and with the rest of her immediate family having died in action several years prior to her birth, the only one left to take care of her was her grandfather Saito Uzumaki. He was the current Uzukage and a ripe 74 years old. Not bad for an old fart, huh? He had faded red hair that reached down to his mid-back and was all tied back into a large ponytail. He wore a golden kimono with a detailed dragon design stitched into the bottom left side going around the back and ending with the head roaring into his right shoulder. The dragon itself was black in design with eyes brighter than rubies. For pants he wore black karate pants with a golden dragon going down each leg. He wore no footwear, claiming it simply interfered with his interactions with the earth. His own eyes were red in color and he had a scar going from his cheek to above his left eyebrow. Hey Kushi-chan, how was your day at the academy? asked the wise old Saito as both he and Kushina gazed upon the beauty of Uzu. Great Gigi. But our teacher asked us a strange question today that no matter what we answered with, the answer was still wrong. Replied Kushina with a slight pout on her face as she rested her chin on top of his head. Ha ha ha. Well, what was the question? This old man still knows a thing or two. Chuckled Saito as he held her legs to make sure she didn't lose her balance. Well, the question was, what makes our village so beautiful? Explained Kushina. Saito began to laugh, causing Kushina to pout. However, before she could voice her irritation, Saito had removed her from her shoulders and was carrying her in his arms before he jumped into the air without the assistance of chakra. He easily reached an altitude of 200 feet before plateauing at that height. However, rather than falling back down to the ground, they remained absolutely stationary in the air. It was as though Saito was walking on air. Now, my dear granddaughter, I want you to look down at the village and tell me what you see. Stated Saito as he held Kushina safely in his arms, making sure that she wouldn't fall to her death. Kushina could see the houses filled with families and the streets filled with merchants. She could see the children playing in the parks and the ninjas training in the fields. She saw everyone in the village and could feel everyone in the village. Everyone, despite their differences, breathing is one, living is one. Their hearts beat is one. I see that you've noticed it, haven't you? The one thing that separates us from the other villages. We are all family. Those other villages believe that the village should come before family. They believe that the suffering of their own family is justified so long as their village survives and thrives. However, we do not believe that. We believe that family will always come first. And here in Uzu, everyone is family despite our differing blood. We will always protect one another to the dying breath. For that is what it means to be an Uzumaki. And should your family fall in battle, then you lie in wait, sharpening your fangs until it is the right moment to strike, until it is the time for revenge. Explained Saito as Kushina stared at him with wonder and admiration in her eyes. At that moment she swore to uphold those beliefs until the day she died. Unfortunately, she would break that vow decades later. Flashback no Jutsu. Kai. New tears flowed down her cheeks once more as she recalled that once precious memory that she had long forgotten. She realized that had broken her word, and worst of all, she had failed not only her grandfather, but all Uzumakis that upheld that belief. She was a disgrace to the Uzumaki name. She had stopped in her search for justice for her clan once her kids were born. She had abandoned her family that had died in Uzu and the one that had ran away a few years ago. Time and time again she had failed her family, but no more. A new flame had been lit in her eyes. A flame far more powerful than the will of fire that the village of Konoha claimed to have. This flame was the flame of retribution. This flame was the flame of justice. This flame was the flame of the Uzumaki. She stood up and wiped away her tears. Her eyes, now filled with a renewed determination, glowed with the ferocity of a dragon. She walked up to Mei Momochi and stared her right in the eye. Lead me to your Uzukage, demanded Kushina with all the determination of a true Uzumaki. Gladly, was Mei's response. Hehehehe, it seems as though she still holds the Uzumaki spirit within her. I wonder what Naruto-kun has planned for her once he sees this. Wondered Mei as she smiled at Kushina before taking them towards the Uzukage tower. They jumped from roof to roof at a normal pace, enjoying the view that the village had to offer. However, as Kushina kept moving, she noticed that little of the villagers were of Uzumaki descent, yet they all bore the Uzumaki seal on them. The Uzumaki seal is placed on a person as proof that they are indeed Uzumaki. This was a village of outsiders. This is not what her grandfather would have wanted. A frown spread across Kushina's face as she sped up a bit in anticipation of pointing this out to the Uzukage. Within a few minutes they had arrived at the entrance of the Uzukage tower. But rather than going in through the front doors, they simply stood there. Kushina was about to voice her concerns when Mei placed her right hand to the wall and channeled some chakra into the wall, which activated a seal at their feet. A flash of light later and they found themselves right outside the Uzukage's office. Kushina, however, looked to be suffering from extreme motion sickness and as a result emptied the contents of her stomach into the nearby trash bin. As she was retching out the contents of her stomach, May walked over and began patting her on the back. Don't worry about it. This happened to everyone on their first try as well. You should feel better in a little bit. Comforted May as she recalled her first time going through that means of transportation. Naruto still sometimes had nightmares of the wrath that followed. You good? One nod was her answer as Kushina got up and walked towards the doors of the Uzukage's office. She was nervous of what kind of man her might be. Was he interested in exploiting Uzu's secret for his own benefit? Was he planning on declaring war on the elemental nations for their involvement with Uzu's destruction? Or was he simply seeking to make Uzu what it was once considered as, a village of gods? Each possibility frightened her to her core. However, what she did not expect to see once she opened those doors was to find the Uzukage with the Uzukage hat over his head sleeping on top of his desk while his shadow clones were completing his paperwork. What she did not expect was to find her own son in the Uzukage's seat sleeping while his shadow clones were working around the office. She did not expect for her son to have long silver and black hair. She did not expect to see her son with icy blue eyes that could freeze over hell. She did not expect for him to have long sharp nails resembling claws. She did not expect for him to have large fangs jutting out from under his lips. She did not expect for him to look so fit. But she sure as ing hell did not expect for him to have 2 silver canine ears and 10 ingwolf-like silver tails sprouting out from his lower back. NN Naruto, whispered out Kushina at an almost unnoticeable volume. However, Naruto as well as his clones were able to hear her perfectly well due to the twitch in his ears atop his head as well as all of them turning to face her while the original lifted up his head from the desk rubbing his eyes away of drowsiness. He blinked several times before realizing exactly who was standing before him in his office. The rest of the clones had already gone back to their work as if nothing had happened. "Ah, Namikaze-san, it's about time you got here," exclaimed Naruto as he released a yawn. A visible flinch came from Kushina, not expecting this kind of apathy from her own son despite all the pain she must have put him through. Naruto-kun, you shouldn't be in the Uzukage's seat like that. You should know better than to bother a cage. Chastised Kushina in an attempt to dictate who the parent was here and who the child was. However, Naruto for one was not going to stand for this. Of course I do. But isn't that exactly what you are doing now, you hypocritical excuse for a mother? Asked Naruto with a sinister grin on his face. Kushina's face morphed into an expression that reflected pure shock and emotional turmoil. On one hand, she was angry at him for referring to her in such a way, yet she could not truly find it in her heart to say she was not a hypocritical excuse for a mother. She was an Uzumaki. Uzumakis are always supposed to be there for their families. However, all she did was abandon him and ignore him during his times of pain and loneliness. She wasn't worthy of the Uzumaki name, she realized that. That's why she wasn't surprised when he called her Namikaze-san rather than Uzumaki-san. But no matter what obstacle she had to overcome, she was determined to somehow fix their relationship. She was determined to make them a family again. I know I made some mistakes, but was all Kushina managed out before being interrupted by Naruto's rage. Some mistakes. Some mistakes. You made way more than some mistakes. You completely destroyed my childhood. You and that Namikaze bastard treated me like an outsider in my own home. You made me feel as though I was no better than trash. Did you know that it got to the point to which I tried to kill myself multiple times? Exclamation mark. But when I tried I would heal every single kami damn time. So don't you dare try to waltz in here and act as though you are my family, let alone my mother. Am I clear, Namikaze? Roared out Naruto as he released his pent-up anger and frustration that he held towards the Namikazes for ruining his childhood, even if he owed them for leading him towards the path to throwing away his humanity and becoming a primordial god capable of anything. It would take a lot for them to be able to earn back his forgiveness. Most of Naruto's lovers as well as close friends and family believed it to be impossible for them to earn his forgiveness. Hell, even Naruto and Okami believed it impossible, but the threads of fate might have more in store for the family than what was once believed. Kushina at this point had all of her emotional scars ripped wide open once more as she truly learned the circumstances of Naruto's life. She had never expected the pain to be so bad that he would have considered suicide to be an option. Let alone carrying it out and healing each time he tried. She couldn't even begin to imagine the kind of mental and emotional scars he must have because her foolishness, because of her husband's foolishness, and because of the village's foolishness. She knew now that she had little to no chance of repairing the bond she had with him all those years ago. She also knew that there was no chance of that bond returning to how it once was. It would always have some doubt embedded within it. Some suspicions lying around waiting to strike should the chance be given. I understand. But no matter what you may think of me, even if you are justified in doing so, I will always be your mother. We will always have the same blood flowing through our veins. We are still family, Naruto-kun. I just want us to go back to being the family we once were. Is there truly nothing I can do to make that wish of mine a reality? Pleaded Kushina as she got down to her hands and knees and begged for his forgiveness. She was prepared to do anything for his forgiveness, no matter the cost. Quote. Naruto was silent for a rather long length of time as though lost in thought. His eyes were scanning her body movements for any signs that she was lying. His ears twitched as they analyzed the rhythm of her heartbeat, looking for any signs of her words being false. His nose tried to find any sense, any increase in output of chemicals that would indicate that she was lying. He was hoping to find anything that would help him call her out on her lies. For him to continue to vent his anger and rage out on her. However, he found no signs that would indicate that she was lying. And that angered him most of all. However, he knew that now was not time for his petty anger. He had a village to run, and he would run it to best of his abilities. Get up. Were the only two words that he said, yet they held such coldness, such fierce apathy that they sent an emotional blade through Kushina's heart. She knew it was a long shot that he would forgive her so readily, but she had to try. She had to at least show him that she was sincere. I could sit here and yell at you for hours, hell I could do for days, on how I suffered in that hellhole. However, I shall be the better person here and drop the subject. For now. Now I suggest you proceed with your mission before you waste any more of my time. Declared Naruto as his cold blue eyes seemed to cause the temperature of the entire building to drop by at least 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I see, but in order for me to proceed I need to speak with the Uzukage. Now would you please tell me where he is, Naruto-kun? Explained Kushina, trying to rein in her emotions so as to not continue to appear weak to not only her own son but to the ninja still in the room with them. First of all, don't add the suffix kun to my name. You do not have the privilege to do so. Secondly, you are speaking to him. Replied Naruto with an inward grin as he saw Kushina's reaction to his final statement. Why you're the Yu Uzukage? But that's impossible. There is no way you can be the cage of an entire village at such a young age. Yelled out Kushina in disbelief. She refused to believe the fact that he was a cage for two main reasons. The first was the most obvious. Cages were usually considered to be SS-ranked nin and were amongst the most powerful people on the planet. For a boy of roughly 16 years of age to be so powerful was unfathomable for the current shinobi world. The second reason was that if he truly was the Cage 10, there was truly no way for him to permanently return to Konoha. If he were a simple ninja or even a missing nin, then there was a possibility of him being pardoned and allowed to return to Konoha as a ninja through either an arranged marriage or some kind of treaty between villages. If he was the Uzukage, then such a possibility was forever out of reach. Of course I am. Ask anyone in the village and they will each tell you that I am the Uzukage. And all of the former Kiri nin will tell you how I came to defeat the former Mizukage's army, the former Mizukage himself, as well as the Sanbi, with only one other for his assistance. And that was several years ago, and I have only grown more powerful as time has passed. Explained Naruto with a smirk on his face, showing off his large canines capable of biting through the toughest of substances. Isn't that right, Mei? Kushina immediately turned towards to where Mei was sitting drinking what seemed to be a delicious cup of tea. At first it seemed that Mei took no notice of Kushina's persistent stare, but as the stare went on, one could notice how uncomfortable Mei was getting. Finally, as several veins popped out of her head in annoyance, she decided to respond Naruto's question in order to destroy any remaining hopes that Kushina had of getting her son home. Yes. Naruto-kun is the current Uzukage of Uzugakure and will be for many years to come until he chooses a successor that he deems is worthy of such a responsibility. Responded Mei before returning to her delightful cup of tea. See, there you have it. I am the current Uzukage of the revived Uzugakure. Now are you going to proceed with your mission or not? Asked Naruto in slight annoyance, as he really didn't feel like arguing about his position to a Namikaze piece of trash. I'll believe you if you defeat me in a spar, declared Kushina due to her stubbornness and thick-headedness. She may have had the evidence laying in front of her, but she was unwilling to accept it until she was certain beyond a doubt. She expected for Naruto to back down and tell her that this was all a ruse to try and rile her up or to prove her dedication to the mission. Yet all she got was a sinister grin that sent shivers down her spine. She felt as though she had awoken the predator and had suddenly become the prey. So you want a spar then? Then that is exactly what you will get. May annoyance to the village and any shinobi currently within the village to go to field number 10. Tell them there will be an entertaining event between a wolf and a mouse. We shall arrive there shortly, so make sure they hurry up, ordered Naruto without removing his predatory gaze from Kushina. All Mei did was smirk in response and shunshin out of the office and alert all the ninja and civilians within Uzu to head towards the Uzukage's private training field. This was going to be an entertaining match indeed, except it would be more one-sided than anything. Everyone except Kushina knew that, but she wasn't willing to back down now. Not when she was so close. I hope you're ready to lose Namikaze-san, because I know for a fact that you are incapable of even injuring me. There is no way that you'll be able to defeat me. And I will make you realize that without an inkling of doubt. I recommend that you go at me with the intent to kill, because if you don't, the match will simply be a bore for my people and it would simply not do for me to disappoint them, now would it? Teased Naruto as his tails playfully moved around in anticipation of the utter destruction they were going to cause. I will not lose, Naruto. I just hope you are ready to own up to your loss and accept that you are not yet ready for such responsibility. And if I win, then you must come back home with me. You must come back to Konoha and live with us, stated Kushina with the utmost confidence, not willing to back down to her son. This only caused Naruto's to grow even more if it was possible. Alright then, Namikaze-san. You've got yourself a deal. But you know what? Just to show how confident I am that I am going to win this spar of ours, if I lose, then not only do I go with you to Konoha, but so does the entire population of Uzu. Every civilian and ninja that currently resides in Uzu will join Konoha upon my defeat, declared Naruto, shocking Kushina that he was willing to do such a thing. She doubted that he would be able to do such a thing, but she decided to accept it, thinking that once he lost he would simply say that the last part of the wager was simply a joke. Deal. And with that final word they were surrounded by a flash of light, and once the light vanished, the office was empty except for the clones of Naruto still working on the day's paperwork. Hey, she is so screwed, said Naruto clone number 1. You got that right, agreed Naruto clone number 2. She'll probably be forced to surrender within 5 minutes of the beginning of the spar, stated the last clone. At the Uzukage's private training field, the entire field was surrounded by what seemed to be the entire village of Uzu. Everyone was waiting in anticipation of the spar that was about to commence between the Uzukage and the wife of the current Hokage, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze, the Red Habanero. Everyone knew who was going to win this fight, but they came anyways because they wanted to see just how dismayed their precious Uzukage was going to make her afterwards. After all, who could defeat a god? Light soon encompassed the entire arena, causing several of the civilians and a few shinobi to cover their eyes. Once the light faded, they could see their precious Uzukage standing there in all his glory, towering over Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze like a giant. Immediately everyone began to cheer for him, yelling out both his name as well as his title. Now then, I see that everyone is here. Now there is no way I am letting you all stand here uncomfortably. So how about I make you an arena to witness this spar? Yelled out Naruto as he brought one hand out in front of him. All he did was snap, and suddenly all of the people of Uzu were floating in the air. Naruto then brought up his other hand and snapped with that one as well, causing an entire stadium to begin to form from the earth, rising from below their feet. Within minutes there was an arena several times larger than the one in Konoha and several times more extravagant. There was also a special seating section for Naruto's student and family, loved ones. So with one final snap, all the citizens were gently placed in their seats, causing another round of applause and cheers to sound through the entire arena. This entire show of power caused Kushina to become extremely nervous about Naruto's power and exactly what he was capable of. However, she refused to back down just yet. She also believed that he must have wasted an enormous amount of chakra and was simply using some type of seal to make it appear as though he used up no chakra at all. That or he simply activated seals that would have caused everything that had just happened to have happened. Now then, before we begin, I would like to inform all of you of something that you might find important. Namikaze-san and I have made a little wager. If I win, then she will finally accept the fact that I am the Uzukage. If she wins, then I will have to go back to Konoha with as a shinobi for that village, and so will all of you. Now before we begin, are there any objections? Declared Naruto with his arms spread out, showing them that he was not lying to them. Kushina was appalled at what Naruto had just pulled. She thought that some of the shinobi in the stands would try to attack him for doing something so foolish. However, what happened next was something that she absolutely could not have anticipated. Go Uzukage-sama, you can win. Kick her, roared out the crowd in approval of Naruto's declaration. None of them even doubted Naruto whatsoever. They all believed that he would win against her. They all even called him Uzukage-sama, further proving his claim of being Uzukage. As soon as the words came out of his mouth, Kushina quickly created what she thought to be a safe distance away from Naruto. Foolish human, there is nowhere she could possibly escape to that Naruto would be unable to find. She immediately created dozens of Kage Bunshin in order to distract Naruto, while she herself took out her blade and prepared for her attack. Meanwhile, Naruto was stuck dealing with a small battalion of Kushina clones that were using chakra chains as well as their own blades in futile attempts to make Naruto bleed. All Naruto did was dodge their attacks with a fluidity that is normally only seen in professional dancers. He was simply toying with her. She knew it, her clones knew it, Naruto obviously knew it, hell, even the audience knew it. So Kushina's clones decided to get serious. Immediately they stopped their attacks and began to surround him, completely leaving no room for escape. Not that Naruto was trying to escape, mind you. Once he was completely surrounded, hundreds of chains seemed to explode from their bodies, consuming their existence, yet merging together around Naruto to form a dome that had many holes, not unlike a fishing net. Except the chains seemed to always be in constant motion, and it appeared as though some of them went underground. Uzumaki no Chen Sutairu. Ryoshi no Wana, Uzumaki chain style, fisherman's trap. Give up now, Naruto. There is no way you can escape that unharmed. If you so much as move, the chains will begin to strike from random locations. Give up now. I don't want to hurt you, exclaimed Kushina as she kept her distance between herself and her son. She still had about a dozen clones left on the field surrounding Naruto should he manage to escape. Each of them covered in explosive tags in an attempt to intimidate Naruto. However, all Naruto did was throw his head back and laugh. And then came the chains to try and impale his body. Kushina's eyes widened in horror at what was about to occur. Her body began to move on its own, her right hand stretching forward in an attempt to reach him, in an attempt to save him. Her mouth was opened in an attempt to yell, but no sound came out. Her own chains had already emerged from her back and from other parts of her body in an attempt to intercept the chains about to pierce her son's body. However, they collided with the surrounding chains, unwilling to let any attacks enter the dome. Time seemed to slow down in Kushina's eyes. The chains slowly approaching Naruto's chest, arms, legs, and head. At the last moment before the chains came into contact with his flesh, Kushina closed her eyes and allowed her tears to begin to leak out at her own foolishness and arrogance. Clang! Kushina's eyes immediately snapped wide open at sound of the chains hitting some kind of metallic substance. Yet imagine her surprise and amazement when she saw that the chains had only hit her son's skin rather than some indestructible metal. The chains seemed to have simply stopped upon contact with his skin, but upon closer observation Kushina noticed that the tips of her chains had become compressed. That would have to mean that her son's body was stronger than most metals in existence. Now the chakra chains that had come into contact with him were now turning silver in color and had begun to corrupt the rest of the jutsu that was currently holding Naruto captive. Surprised? Well, you shouldn't be. You have no idea what kind of training I've undergone as well as what my current abilities are. I will repeat what I said in my office. There is nothing you can do that could possibly injure me, let alone defeat me. However, knowing you, you won't simply give up, so I'll simply have to beat you into submission until I utterly crush your fighting spirit. Now, like I said earlier, come at me with intent to kill. Taunted Naruto as Kushina's jutsu was now completely under his control and was no longer in a net-like shape but rather a large silver ball of chakra that simply floated around Naruto. He then reached out for the ball with his hand, and then after grasping the ball he got into pitcher position. A large smirk on his face as one could see his muscles flexing. Batter up, motherer! Yelled out Naruto as he threw the sphere of condensed chakra chains at Kushina in a baseball-like fashion. The sphere flew at speeds that normal civilians and genin were unable to see, let alone react to. However, Kushina was no genin. She was a former Anbu captain and currently held the rank of Junin within the village of Konoha, so she was easily able to avoid the incoming projectile by jumping a couple feet to her left. However, as soon as her feet touched the ground again, she immediately brought up both her arms in a desperate attempt to block whatever she had sensed lunge at her. Imagine her surprise when it was one of the silver chakra chains that had been condensed into that ball. Unfortunately, as she now realized, her block was useless since the chain simply pushed against her arms as well as scraping away her skin, causing blood to explode from her arms and sending her crashing into the wall of the arena. Upon impact, a large crater was formed and Kushina's back arched in pain as she coughed up some blood. Uzumaki no Chen Sutairu. Tako Boru Uzumaki chain style, octopus ball. You really shouldn't underestimate me, Namikaze-san. You might just get killed if you do. Chuckled Naruto as he stayed in the same place as when they began this spar. Oh, and by the way, duck. Kushina, realizing what he meant by that, immediately performed a shunshin, mere seconds before a multitude of chains collided with where she was, causing the entire wall to begin to crumble and fall. The ball simply remained there with 7 chains protruding from its smooth surface. Kushina unsheathed her blade once more and held it with both hands before closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. She brought the blade in front of her and then slowly opened her eyes. She saw her target and was prepared to eliminate it. She rushed forward, lowering her blade to her right leg and prepared to face the incoming frenzy of chains she anticipated to rush at her. The ball, rather than launch all its chains at her at once, sent out 4 chains while the other 3 stayed back, thus diverting Kushina's attention to only those 4 chains. She brought up her blade and slashed the first chain on her left before using her momentum to spin and slash downwards at the one to her right. She then pushed off her right leg and sliced through the remaining 2 chains. She kept running towards the ball, which she had analyzed to be the weak point of this jutsu, but then all of a sudden jumped up into the air and faced towards the ground. Within seconds, the remaining 3 chains had burst up from under the ground and were now preparing to stab through her to end the fight. Just as Kushina was about to strike, she sensed the other 4 chains behind her ready to stab her as well. She looked back for a mere second and noticed that none of the chains had received any damage, telling her that either they could either regenerate or they had simply not been affected by her previous attacks. They were closing in on her faster than she would have liked.